since about 1930, statisticians have been studying the structure of language at a sentence level and at an adjective level to determine what's the underlying correlational structure of descriptive phrases as they apply to human beings. So for example, if you're happy, you're talkative, and that might not be surprising, but the fact that those two things are tightly connected was one of the things that was discovered by the factor analytic processes that led to the development of the Big Five. In the Big Five, there are roughly 5 traits, as the name might indicate. Extroversion, which is a positive emotion trait. Neuroticism, which is a negative emotion trait. Agreeableness, which is warmth and empathy, compassion. The other side of that is kind of a harsh coldness, I guess. Openness, which is both intelligence and creativity. And conscientiousness, which is industriousness and orderliness. Now, there are virtues, so to speak, and faults associated with all of those dimensions. So you can be too extroverted, which makes you rather impulsive, and if you're very extroverted, it's more difficult to get good grades in university because you're always out having fun with your friends and partying. And that might be good in that it'll help you develop a fairly extensive social network, which is a useful thing if you're associated with people who are useful for social networking purposes, but it can really interfere with your ability to sit by yourself and study. If you're conscientious, that's a good predictor of academic success, because conscientious people do what they say they're going to do, and they seem to suffer shame and self-disgust and self-contempt and guilt and so on if they don't. If you get too conscientious, though, you can get quite boxed in and orderly and narrow. And orderliness, by the way, seems to be associated with right-wing political views, and when it's extreme, it starts to get repressive. And so, the point of all this is that there are 5 traits, and they have positive and negative aspects, especially at the extremes. And these programs are set up, first of all, so that you'll see a series of adjectives that are universal descriptors. So it's basically a small set of adjectives, 100, that kind of cover each dimension of personality with a reasonable degree of comprehensiveness. Then you'll be asked to pick which ones you think are particularly relevant to you, and then you'll be asked to narrow that to a final list. In one half of the exercise, a list that represents your virtues, and then in the other half of the exercise, a list that represents your faults. Then you'll be asked to describe a time when that virtue played a positive role for you, or when that fault interfered with you. And then you'll be asked to describe how you might capitalize on that virtue in the future, or perhaps bring that fault under control in the future. And it turns out that writing exercises of this sort are very practically useful. They have a variety of positive effects, one of which seems to be an increase in academic performance, and our research so far has indicated that that increase can be quite substantial with similar programs. At McGill, we raised the academic performance of struggling university students by 25%, so a whole grade point. And at a business school in Holland, where this is being studied in some depth, we've studied 2,000 people. They actually did the future authoring program and not the present authoring program, which is the one you're going to do. And we improved their overall academic achievement by about 30% as well. Turns out that articulating yourself is an extraordinarily useful thing to do, and you could also think about that in a more comprehensive way as the goal of, say, psychotherapy and personality transformation. A lot of what's happening as you mature and develop as a personality is that what you are, whatever that means, I guess it's your behaviors and your potential, and I don't know exactly what potential is, but your behaviors and your potential can be increasingly organized at a high level of consciousness, articulated at a high level of consciousness. And articulation is a funny word, because partly it means joint articulation. You know, your hands are very articulated, and that's why you can do a lot of things with them. And hands and speech are very tightly related, which is why most people's speech centers are in the same hemisphere as their dominant hand. anyways, articulating yourself makes you able to do many more things with yourself, and it also seems to quell your negative emotion, partly because it's clarifying you, you know. The more you leave things muddy in your life, the less defined things are around you, the more active your stress response systems are, because if things are murky and undefined, your stress systems basically assume that there are alligators and snakes and predators hiding in all that fog and gloom, and that you're in a very dangerous environment. But if you clarify that with careful attention and articulation, you can clear away the fog and the gloom, and that only leaves you with your actual problems, which once defined carefully, you might find manageable. And an example of that would be, you know, when you go into your room and you haven't done your homework for a while, and there's piles of papers piling up, or maybe there's piles of junk on your computer, it doesn't really matter. And you'll have a very powerful tendency to avoid that. Not even to look at it, right? You don't even want to look at it, because and that's chaos. It's sort of growing in your environment, and there's a specific part of your brain which evolved to detect snakes that deals with such little chaotic piles of undone business, and the more of those that are around you, psychologically or physically, the more negative emotion you experience, the less hope you experience, and the larger your stress response chronically. And that's not good, because if your stress response is chronically elevated, that suppresses your immunological function. It makes you overweight, it predisposes you to diabetes and cancer, it makes you age faster, it increases the probability that you'll have anxiety disorders and depression. It's a bad thing. So clarifying who you are and what you're doing is a good thing, unless you want all those other things to happen, which seems highly improbable, although people desire some very strange things, and that's part of what we'll talk about as this course progresses.